Over time, I began to notice changes in John. Our days, which used to start with smiles and hugs, became dull and monotonous. He started coming home from work late, apologizing to me for his fatigue and giving strange explanations of why he had to stay longer. Once, in the morning, when I looked at his phone, he involuntarily exclaimed and grabbed it from my hands. "What are you doing, Lisa?" he asked with a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I just wanted to play some music," I replied, but deep down something whispered to me that he was hiding something important. Evening after evening, John came home with a mysterious look, and I started hearing strange sounds from his phone when he left the room to talk. Every time he claimed it was just work matters. However, one day, when I came home earlier than usual, I heard him talking in the bathroom. "You have no idea how much I miss you," he said tenderly. My heart stopped. He hadn't spoken to me like that in a long time. I closed the door and ran to the bedroom, hiding in tears. With each passing day, my suspicions grew, and I decided that I needed to find out the truth. I started watching him when he left for work and when he came back. Outside, I eavesdropped on his conversations, trying to understand who he was talking to so often. One day, while he was at work, I decided to check his car. Under the seat, I found a letter with a woman's name, Emily. My heart skipped a beat. I carefully opened it and read the words that broke my soul. Emily talked about her love for John and how much she missed him. At that moment, I realized that my suspicions were based on truth. My life was falling apart before my eyes, and I didn't know what to do next. My suspicions continued to grow, and I decided it was time for a more thorough investigation. The mysterious phone calls that John had started receiving became a key element for me. Every evening when he came home, his phone rang. He always left the room to answer these calls, and I started to ask myself questions. "John, is it someone important?" I asked once, as he left the room to talk. "Yes, it's just one of my work colleagues," he replied, trying to smile. "They sometimes call to discuss business matters." But I couldn't believe his words. Why not discuss business matters in our presence? I continued to watch him and eventually even decided to follow up on who was calling. One day, when he left the room, I quietly approached the door. He spoke in a whisper, but I still heard a fragment of the conversation. "Sweetheart, don't worry, we'll see each other again soon," he said. What I heard made me tremble. These were words of tenderness and promise. How could he speak like that to someone else? My hands were shaking, and my heart was beating fast. I was sure he was cheating on me. In the evening when he returned, I decided to approach the matter more aggressively. "John, who are you constantly talking to?" I asked with alarm in my voice. "Lisa, it's just work stuff, I promise," he replied, avoiding my eyes. But I could no longer just sit and wait. I decided to find out who was hiding behind these mysterious phone calls. I sat down at the computer and started looking for information, but the name Emily was too common, and I couldn't find any specific information. My nerves were on edge, and I started experiencing strange moments of paranoia. Every time he answered a call, my thoughts revolved around what could be happening there. It was a terrible torture. My suspicions never left me. I knew something was hidden in the shadows, and I needed to uncover the truth. One day, when John left for work, I decided to start my investigation. My decision was final. I had to find out who he was talking to and what he was hiding. At first, I decided to start with his phone. He always kept it with him, but I managed to figure out his password. For a moment, I felt like a trespasser, but I couldn't ignore my suspicions any longer. Once I got into his phone, I started looking through his messages and call logs. My hands shook with nervousness as I looked through his call history. Most of the numbers were unfamiliar to me, but one number caught my eye. It was labeled Emily, the same woman whose name I found in a letter in his car. Mysterious calls from Emily. It confirmed that he was hiding something from me. I decided that I needed to eavesdrop on John's conversation with her. I knew it would be difficult, but I couldn't remain in the dark any longer. Eavesdropping on John's conversation with Emily was no easy task. I had to learn how to use an app for recording calls on his phone. It was unfair and violated his personal space, but I felt like I had no other choice. Weeks went by, and I continued to monitor John's actions. Every time he left the room to talk to Emily, I turned on the recording. My emotions were a mix of hope and fear. I was scared to find out the truth, but I couldn't bear the deceit any longer. And then, one evening, when he walked into the room, I clicked on the record button and started breathing slowly, trying not to make any noise. He started talking to Emily, and I heard their voices. "Darling, you have no idea how much I miss you," John said. "And I miss you too, John," Emily responded with tenderness in her voice. My legs gave out. My worst fears had been confirmed. I couldn't listen anymore and turned off the recording. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I couldn't ignore the fact of his infidelity any longer. I decided it was time to confront John with the truth. As difficult as it was, I couldn't continue with the lie. The next morning, when John was making breakfast, I decided to speak up. "John," I started, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." He looked up at me and nodded. I continued, "I know about your conversations with Emily." His face went pale, and he put down his spoon. "Lisa, I can explain," he said, but his voice was filled with fear. "I don't want to hear your excuses," I replied, clenching my fists. "I know you're cheating on me, John." Silence filled our kitchen. We looked at each other, and in that moment, I realized that our marriage couldn't continue in this way. "Lisa, please, give me a chance to explain," he said, but I was resolute. "We can't continue like this," I said. "We need to get divorced." The words felt like a final verdict, and tears started streaming down my cheeks. I couldn't ignore the betrayal and lies anymore. Our marriage was broken, and I knew we needed to move on. After I told John that we needed to get a divorce, our lives became even more tense. There was a constant strain in the room, and every conversation turned into an argument. I was determined and didn't want to live in lies anymore, but John resisted. "Lisa, let's try to restore our relationship," he would say. "I regret what happened, but my wounds were too deep to simply disappear." I knew that divorce was the only way out. However, divorce is not only an emotional decision, but also a legal process. We began to gather documents and hire lawyers. With each step of this process, our marriage was falling apart even more. Of course, there were moments of weakness when John tried to persuade me to change my mind. Once he came to my chair and sat next to me. "Lisa, you can forgive me," he said, his voice broken. "I understand I made a mistake." I looked at him, but could not find the strength to forgive. My pain was too strong. "John, it's too late," I whispered. Our endless arguments and conversations about divorce also affected our children. They saw us shouting and arguing, and it broke their hearts. I knew that divorce would be tough for them, but I believed it was the best decision in this situation. When the day of the divorce arrived, emotions were at their peak. We came to court, and my hands were trembling as I looked at John. It was painful to realize that we would no longer be the family we used to be. The legal process was long and difficult. We divided property, discussed issues regarding children and finances. My lawyers fought for my interests, and I felt it was the only way to protect my children's future. When the verdict was finally given, it divided our lives. The children stayed with me, which was a relief, but also a responsibility. John received certain rights to see the children, but our connection was already broken. After the divorce, I tried to move on with everyday life. I worked to provide our family with a decent future. The children also adapted to the new reality and started going to school. Over time, my pain began to fade, and I realized that divorce was a necessary step. I no longer lived in a world of lies and suspicions. My life became stable and predictable, and it was good for the children. Over time after my divorce, I began to grasp a new reality. My children adapted to their new life, went to school, and made new friends. They were my main support, and I tried to do everything possible to provide them with stability and safety. My job also helped me get through this difficult time. I immersed myself in my work responsibilities and gradually began to move up the career ladder. Work became not only a source of income, but also a place where I felt confident and valuable. However, despite external success, I still felt pain and emptiness from the divorce inside. It was a time when I began to think about myself, about what I wanted and expected from life. I wanted to find myself again, to understand who I had become after all these changes. My friends and family were my support. They listened to me, supported, and advised me. They were my emotional support, and I am grateful to them for that. However, one evening when I was sitting alone by the window, my eyes fell on a book on the shelf. It was a book about travels, about countries and cultures that I had always dreamed of seeing. Looking at the cover, I suddenly felt that it could be my chance to free myself from the shadows of the past. The next morning, I took a leave from work and went on a small trip to a nearby town. It was my first solo outing after the divorce. I stayed in a small hotel and started exploring the surroundings. The first stop was at the local museum, where I immersed myself in the history and culture of this town. Then I went for a walk on the streets, studying architecture and talking to local residents. I was surprised by the warm and friendly atmosphere. With each passing day, I became more open to new experiences and acquaintances. I tried local cuisine, rode a bicycle around the area, and even decided to visit the local market. At the market, I was drawn to an old woman who sold handmade items. We started talking, and she told me about her life, about her family, and how she found joy in handicrafts. It was a lesson for me that happiness can be found even in simple pleasures of life. As I traveled, I began to understand that the world is huge and full of opportunities. I no longer felt limited and confined to the past. Travel gave me the freedom to think about the future, new goals, and dreams. One evening, sitting by the campfire on the seashore, I realized that I had freed myself from the burden of the past. Life after divorce had been difficult and painful, but it also gave me the opportunity to rethink myself and my values. I realized that happiness is within me, and no circumstances can take it away from me. My trip ended, but it left me with a sense of a new beginning. When I returned home, I decided to start a new chapter in my life. I went to courses to learn new skills and started working with charity. My children saw in me an example of a strong and independent woman, and this inspired them. We became closer, and our relationship became stronger. Freeing myself from the shadows of the past was a long process, but it made me stronger and wiser. I found myself again, gained joy in life, and confidence in the future. It was my path to liberation, to a new beginning, and I was ready to embrace everything that life would offer. Since my divorce and release from the weight of the past, several years have passed. My life has transformed, and I have become the person I never dared to dream of becoming. This journey was difficult and full of trials, but it also taught me to value myself and my independence. The moral of this story consists of several important lessons that I learned along my life path. The first lesson is that betrayal and divorce can be extremely painful and destructive events, but they do not necessarily have to define your life. It is important to find the strength within yourself to move forward in the search for your own happiness and release from the pain of the past. Divorce can be the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of the world. The second lesson is that the support of loved ones and friends plays a huge role in the healing process. Talk to people, trust them, and don't be afraid to ask for help. They can become your support and source of strength in difficult times. The third lesson is the exploration of new possibilities and the search for meaning in life after divorce. Travel, education, and new hobbies can all help you find joy and your own identity. Do not be afraid to open new doors and look to the future. The fourth lesson is the realization that happiness and satisfaction can be found in simple joys of life. It can be a hobby, a walk in the park, or lunch with friends. It is not always necessary to seek happiness in big and complex goals. It can be hidden in everyday moments. The fifth lesson is the confidence in one's own worth and ability to overcome difficulties. Divorce can undermine your confidence, but it is important to remember that you are valuable and deserving of happiness. Believe in yourself and your strength. Life after divorce can be difficult and painful, but it can also be a period of self-discovery, growth, and new beginnings. This is a story about how I coped with betrayal and divorce, and how it helped me find freedom and happiness. My children saw how I was able to overcome difficulties, and it became an important lesson for them about the strength of the human spirit. The moral of this story is that even in the most difficult moments of life, when it seems like the world is falling apart, you can find the strength to move forward and seek happiness. Do not be afraid to let go of the past and open doors to new possibilities. Life is full of unexplored horizons, and every day is a chance to start anew.